Joining us now to break down the effects that such a policy would have is Dennard, a senior communications advisor for the Republican National Committee. Paris, when we look at this idea of defunding the police, I mean, it's something that I didn't even think was something people wanted until just a couple of days ago. I know that people wanted reforms, but when we look at the statistics behind actual getting rid of the police, what does that mean?
You know, I think that what we see are Democrats playing into the fears and the emotions of a lot of people who are crying out for help and who sincerely want change and action. And they're trying to convince them that somehow defunding the police is going to help them keep the peace and keep security in these most vulnerable communities who actually need the safety of a police force, to keep them safe, to keep their business from not being burnt to the ground. When they, you know what, and I think this is going to happen. Private security forces are going to come in and help the wealthy and to help the people that can afford it. But the people in the inner city who really need it the most, that all these extreme radical liberals are talking about defunding the police, that's not going to have an impact on your wealthy people behind a gated community. Those people who are currently suffering and currently being damaged greatly economically and physically by violence and death are going to need the police force to keep them safe. And so it's really dishonest and just very sad that Democrats are resorting to this type of language and these tactics to appeal to the hearts of people who are suffering. It's wrong.
And when we look at different cities where this has been applied to some degree, we brought up Baltimore before, but I know they've also tried the same thing in Chicago. Even at some point a couple decades ago in New York, they tried pulling back the police in more communities where there were minorities and more immigrants, and it wasn't advantageous for those individuals as well. So I don't think either that there's a big support system behind the idea of completely defunding the police. I do understand the argument where maybe reforms should be made, and that's essentially what they might be saying, but the messaging, just that when you say defund the police, the average American hears that, and I believe that they do not support that idea whatsoever. And then on the other hand of this coin, you get President Trump possibly giving an address sometime this week. There's reports circulating that he may be speaking directly to the American people. Do you think that he should do that in order to contrast himself from what's being proposed by Democrats right now?
I don't think the president needs to do anything to contrast himself from the Democrats, because the contrast is clear: speech or no speech. It is clear what these Democrats, these radicals, are up to. It is clear, listening to the feckless policies of Joe Biden that he's presenting from his basement. It's clear when you look at these Democrats who are trying to have cities defund the money going to the police force to keep them safe. It is clear. The American people know what side President Trump stands on. He stands by communities. He stands by small business owners. He stands by these entrepreneurs, and he stands by these communities that of color, namely, who want security. They want peace, but he also stands with the people who want justice. Defunding the police and these tactics will not bring peace, will not bring justice, and will not bring action.
And then we look at what former Vice President Joe Biden is dealing with in this whole situation. And it is a difficult thing that he has faced with now, because on one hand, you have progressives who are calling to defund the police, and that's a demographic that he needs if he wants to win. I mean, we saw that the Bernie supporters, for example, didn't come out for Hillary Clinton in 2016.
Right.
That was detrimental to her campaign. But if he does that, he may alienate an even larger part of the more independent, more moderate part of the party that he once again needs. So if you're former Vice President Joe Biden, how are you responding to these calls?
You're responding by the way Joe Biden's acting, by pretty much doing nothing and not leading. At this time, the American people need leadership. At this time, the American people need someone who is unafraid to stand up for what's right and provide the leadership that we need to get through this tough time. President Trump proudly said, "I understand your pain. I am standing there with you on the side of the protesters, on the side of the people who want justice for George Floyd and his death. And I want to bring justice to the families who looked at that video and saw the murder of George Floyd and thought that was disgusting." But he also stands with the small business owners and every thinking American who can understand that it is wrong to have violence and looting by Antifa and other people destroying these neighborhoods and destroying these communities. And Joe Biden, you get nothing. And so he's unafraid because he doesn't have the spine or the backbone to stand up against AOC and the squad and the rest of the liberals who are pushing this party over the cliff. But I say go ahead and let him do it, because the Democrats are known for overreach. And this is yet another example of their ridiculous overreach that's going to backfire with the American people.
I think you're exactly right when you say that in a time like this, the American people want unity, a little bit more calmness. They don't like the unrest that's going across the country. And even when we talk about the idea of rioting and looting, that is something that a very overwhelming majority of American people do not want. And when you say to defund the police in response to that, I just don't think it sits well with the American people. But Paris Dennard, thank you for coming on tonight talking about this issue.
Anytime. Thanks for having me.